Hello, John Lai here, CEO at Evermind, and I also have Eunice Low, data analyst that works for many other companies. And we're doing another question and answer episode. This time, the question we've been asked is, what are some of the challenges associated with creating a federated ID within a data system, a data platform? And let me kind of give some context around that. So that challenge speaks to a greater problem generally is how do you actually make an identity management layer, a reliable identity management layer, uh, one where specifically you can create one federated or one consolidated customer profile to link the profiles of that customer across a whole bunch of data platforms. Okay, so I'll give an example. For a lot of companies, oftentimes they'll do marketing across many different channels. They'll have a direct mail campaign, they'll have social media, they'll have pay-per-click campaigns, and every one of these platforms will track information about a customer in its own platform. So you might have, let's say, a Scott McKay in your CRM, and you might have an S McKay in some of your Facebook lists, and you might yet have another person with just the acronyms SM in your newsletter list. So these profiles are broken up across all these different platforms, and oftentimes to craft an effective marketing strategy and definitely to implement against it, you really need that one consolidated customer profile that links all of these together. So that's generally the problem that's a lot of data and analytics company and development firms try to solve when crafting, let's say, a system of record that they can rely upon to gain better insight into their customers. So that's how I would describe the problem. Eunice, do you think I've described it accurately, or do you feel there's a different way to define the problem?
No, I think you said pretty much most of it, where you do have disparate data sets, and then you have known and unknown customer information, and you're trying to tie all the known and unknown customer information into one identity for that individual. But because one user could probably have multiple email addresses, or they didn't enter it properly, or they're using their email addresses or their identities in many different types of ways. Like maybe they have an email address that's for more personal information and one that is for just like marketing emails. So they don't really care. But at the end of the day, it's still one person. And also if they use multiple devices, they'll also have different identities as well. So I guess it's really difficult to actually know whether that is one customer or whether it's actually different customers or one customer that's using these channels in different journeys and experiences as well.
Yeah, and I think you pretty much just were able to jump into right at some of those challenges, right? So as a team is trying to create that one system, or let's say the federated ID. When they say the federated ID, what they mean by this is, let's say you have one system that's the most authoritative, and you have customer ID 1234. Customer ID 1234 is also the same as customer 111 in Facebook or customer 444 in another platform. And the question becomes, what is the challenge in trying to create that one master ID that consolidates all these profiles? And Eunice, you basically already, just off the bat, you listed two challenges. One of them is that, yeah, people could be using, one person could be using different email addresses across these different platforms. They might log into their Facebook with a different email, and they might sign up for your newsletter with a different email, but it's the same person. So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two, you mentioned different devices. Some of these, depending on what type of campaigns you're running, your laptop versus your phone versus your computer, they might use different cookies or different ways of identifying who that customer is. So that's the second problem. You have these different devices with different ways of identifying the customer. What are some other challenges that you know of, Eunice, that cause it to be difficult to create that one master customer record that links all of them?
I think beyond just even marketing touch points, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is relate the marketing touch points back to the actual point of purchase and the sale. So even to be able to link those different marketing identities to that point of sale customer, it's another challenge as well, because unless the person who has done the marketing touch points and then actually transacted and make that sale, it's hard to kind of correlate the two together. So that is another challenge as well, to figure out how that person interacted on your website or through your email or marketing channels and then actually made a sale. So that attribution sometimes is really difficult as well. And then when you're actually doing that point of purchase, it could be an online point of purchase, or it could be in-store point of purchase. So then those two could be in two disparate data sets as well. And relating it back to the marketing channels is another difficulty.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess you tell me if this is right or wrong when it comes to these marketing touch points. So let's say a hypothetical scenario. You send out some, you do some pay-per-click campaigns. A person interacts through those campaigns. You have one marketing touch point right there. Maybe a few weeks later, you send out a newsletter email. They actually open and they click on some of the links in the newsletter to land on some of your promotional web pages. And then they might travel again within your website. That's like at least 2 or 3 marketing touch points right there. And maybe sometime down the road, they actually make a purchase with a coupon. And that's yet another marketing touch point. And every one of these touch points, they're touching a different technology or a medium that you've used for marketing. And the challenge is, how do you actually link all these touch points together? Am I correct in describing that problem?
Mm-hmm, exactly. And then the other thing is, like, especially since like there are going to be multiple touch points, just like you laid out in that journey, it's like, even if they've actually made that purchase, how do we know how much weight to attribute to each of these touch points to say that channel actually helped to push the customer through the journey to actually make that point of purchase? So it's not only do you have to be able to track all these different touch points to the sale and attribute it backwards, but also when you analyze it, like figuring out how much weight to give each of these touch points, because obviously it's a lot easier to know that that last touch point actually made that sale, but then you also know that the customer went through different journeys and had some lag time to actually make that sale. So you can't just attribute all the spend towards that last touch point. You also have to attribute it to the other touch points before that. So it's more than just tracking is one part of it, but then the other part is how to weigh that attribution towards the rest of the journey.
Yeah, and I think was discussed in one of our earlier videos, closely related to sales matchback, but I suppose in a much broader sense, just attribution in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sales is so focused on the actual conversion at that final point. Attribution, you weigh out the value of that interaction with each one of your touch points throughout the whole journey. And I think one of the things that data analysts and marketing consultants will do for you early on is to help come up with not just the customer journey, but the data journey, so that you can properly track all these things and assign the appropriate weight and value to them. So yes, all these different touch points causes yet another challenge in trying to create that one confederated customer profile. Can you think of any other situations that make it difficult to create that one master profile?
I think the other big problem that like a lot of people have is, in all these different touch points, they might not accurately capture the actual customer. So sometimes, like, even if you're online and you're entering your email address, you might not enter it properly. So then you might miss a character, or you accidentally give somebody else's phone number. And then so in that case, you're not actually capturing the right customer as well. And then there's actually been cases where people would creatively create a spam email because they don't want to enter their real email. So they'll be like test@test.com. Like, obviously that's not a real email, but it still works in some cases. So sometimes people will create fake identities as well. And even if it's not an error, it counts as another customer. So it's key to take these kind of case studies out as well.
Yeah, and I think a very close cousin to that problem is that people might not standardize their email address. Sorry, not email. Their physical addresses. You do have some people type in one George St period, and yet another one could be one George Street. And there are ways, of course, to standardize those email addresses automatically, but it's just extra effort. And if some of that address is not complete or erroneous, then again, it puts another challenge into creating that one master record. I think also another close thing that I've witnessed is that I think sometimes you'll notice, let's say, married individuals, sometimes they might subscribe to a marketing campaign with their personal email address or personal profile. Other times it might be something like James and Mary, and it'll be a family house or a household or family that will subscribe to marketing campaign. In which case, you don't have resolution into individual members. So we've seen that as well.
I think another thing that we haven't talked about yet is also if a company doesn't have a historical identity, then it's really difficult for them to create one. So sometimes they'll join some items together to kind of create that identity. So they might do like an email address plus like home address, and then try to kind of pseudo a kind of identity for this person. But then sometimes that doesn't work as well, because then you'll probably have duplicates, or you might have too many. So it really depends on how they create that identity as well for this historical data. And then that could also clutter your federated ID as well.
Yeah. And I think so that's a good point. And that just reminded me of another one where if a person or profile does exist in multiple platforms, even if you can match them, you have yet another problem. Which one is the most recent, or which one should be the most authoritative? Making that first decision, right? That's really a business question. I think there are different ways to deal with it, but I think that's another thing that can cause a challenge of creating that consolidated profile.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and then sometimes in some businesses, there might be a case where a customer is allowed to have multiple IDs. So if a customer, for example, is allowed to have multiple accounts, then they'll have multiple IDs. And then so how do you kind of do have that system in place so that you do have a customer ID, but then you also have multiple account IDs that are associated to that customer ID, and then make sure that there aren't duplicates. And if you have marketing related to those multiple accounts, how do you attribute that back as well? It's going to be a process that needs to be standardized and have to be analyzed properly to know how to match those marketing touch points back to those multiple accounts and then back to that single customer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when a brand or company chooses to support this, multiple identity strategy, they do have to take it really carefully, plan that on how to consolidate all these profiles later on. Can you think of any other? I know that there's many specific cases every company that will face. All the ones we've listed so far are the very popular ones, and I think I want to just keep it at the popular ones that everyone can identify with. Are there any other big ones that you can think of, Eunice?
Even like when we're sometimes, like if I move around to like different companies, I'll have the same I'll probably subscribe to data science club multiple times using multiple work emails, but at the end of the day it's still me.
Right.
So but they'll never know that, and they'll know that this person is signing up for multiple, like these five work addresses are signing up for my newsletter, but then at the end of the day it's still me.
Right.
So then how do you associate like one work email to the other work email?
Yeah, and that's similar to how if a person uses multiple email, and which means they can also use multiple addresses, which we have seen. Some people do work in different locations throughout the continent or throughout the world, and Yeah, and if someone has a very common name, let's say George Brown, right? That could be a very common name, and you do have different addresses for a George Brown. You don't know if for sure if these are different individuals or if it's one individual that has multiple locations. So that makes it harder to confederate or to consolidate into a profile. So yeah, I feel those are all the big popular items that we've seen that I've seen personally. But every company will have very unique cases that's unique to their data set that they'll have to come up with strategy for. And for all the items that we have brought up, there are many popular ways to treat it, which we can discuss in a future video. But oftentimes you do have to craft a custom strategy on how to create that federated ID. How do you want just the whole data architecture and data modeling? It's going to be unique to each company. Yeah, so those are all my thoughts. Eunice, do you think there's anything else we missed out or anything else you want to add?
I think I just want to underline why it's really important to have such an ID, because again, like if you didn't have that ID for that one customer that integrates all known and unknown data points about that person, you're going to probably miss a lot of pieces of the customer journey that the customer has actually gone through, but you didn't know that they did. So then you won't be able to reach out to them in their unknown phases and actually action upon those other phases that you didn't capture. So if you are able to create a holistic identity for this one person, it's a lot easier to know what touch points you should actually action upon to make them make that purchase at the end of the day. And if you don't capture all these items, then you might be missing parts of the story that led them to the actual action. And then you won't be able to influence them as much as you could have.
Yeah, and I think, and this is especially the case for any types of loyalty marketing or customer relationship or CRM, remarketing or any of those things. Yeah, you really want that Confederate ID to be able to capture all the different profiles and consolidate into one, so you really can see the whole history. Especially if your marketing camp efforts are really based on that historical engagements you've had with those prospects and customers. And yeah, so I think we'll just stop here then, and then we'll in a future episode we'll talk to maybe some other common strategies on how to address simple common tactics to creating that federated ID for a customer profile. Okay. All right, see you everyone.